Thank you for being here. I've just finished my intervention on behalf of the European Parliament at this historic meeting of EU heads of state or government together with the President of Ukraine. This morning, President Zelensky spoke from the European Parliament to Europe. It was a strong message of unity and a reminder that the battle for Ukraine is not just one for territory, but also one in defense of our shared values. In my discussions with the leaders this afternoon, I made 3 points in relation to Ukraine. First of all, Ukraine needs our continued support and it needs weapons. Secondly, our aim is peace, a peace with freedom and justice, a peace with dignity. And thirdly, Ukraine is Europe and it belongs in the European Union, and the starting of accession negotiations is within reach. Maybe even this year, and we need to be able to be ready to follow through on our word. On migration, year after year, legislature after legislature, this has been a reoccurring challenge for us. We have not managed to agree on a long-term and sustainable approach, but the last years have shown us that we can find agreements that go beyond the immediate, and here we have a plan on the drawing board. We hear a lot about new proposals and ideas, but our position, and one that I reiterated today, is that there is a European pact on migration and asylum, which already addresses most, if not all, the issues we discuss, whether it is about the external borders, secondary movements, returns, the external dimension, solidarity. It's all in there. So our point would be to get to the legislative work. There are a few months left ahead for our work before the end of the legislative period, and I would like us to continue on the good work that has taken place over the past months in this year. A few words on the economy. We are facing huge challenges, admittedly, at the moment, but Europe also has far more to offer than we give ourselves credit for. I said this with the leaders. The single market, which is the world's largest single and democratic market, has strengthened our place in the world for 30 years. And my message was to build on this, to speed up investments in Europe, to put the European economy back on a stable path of growth. Only this morning, the European Parliament adopted its position on the EU gas regulation and on the last big file of the fifth Fit for 55 package, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. We are finalising the European climate law, and therefore what we should be aiming for is how we are going to gain a competitive edge globally by sticking to our democratic values, but also by pursuing our ambitious climate agenda. Again, let's stick to the good plan that we already have. In December, I had made this point, and I reiterated it today, that we must avoid the slippery slope leading to the bottom of the protectionist race. We do not need to fence ourselves in. Our economy has grown over the years precisely because we did the opposite, and we must continue to insist that our way of doing things works. 2 last points I would like to mention. That yesterday the European Parliament gave its full support for the lifting of the cooperation and verification mechanism for Romania, as we have already done for Bulgaria. And I want to restate our strong support for Schengen accession as soon as possible for these 2 EU members. Last point I made with the leaders was that I paid tribute to Nikos Anastasiadis, who will soon hand over the reign of Cyprus after 10 years as president. I thanked him for his commitment to our European project, to peace, and for all that he has done for regional stability in the last decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. So now for a couple of questions. Silvia, I see your hand. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Silvia Yusuf from El País newspaper. This is on immigration. As you've stated, I mean, there's a recurrent issue that also divides very much the European Parliament as well as the EU leaders, which is if the European Union should finance or not fences, walls, concretely, not just infrastructure, but the word fence or wall. My question is, what's your position on this, and if you think that this, because some leaders have spoken very strongly about this and have put like ultimatums of this, seemingly. So could this hot topic derail today's debate on immigration?
I think rather than focus on specifics and the divergences between European Union member states and also fault lines, let's say, both geographic and political in the European Parliament, which reflect a lot national positions. More often than not, I would say that let's look at where our external border policy is and how it's working or how it's not. Let's focus on why there are less returns today than there used to be, and whether there should be, and this is my strong opinion, of having a European approach with third countries in terms of taking back their own nationals if they're not eligible for protection. And I would also like to focus on the fact that we showed so much solidarity over this past year with the almost 7 million Ukrainians, still about 3 million living and working, so welcomed in our European Union, that we need to continue to find that political will in 2023, which might see new influxes. I would also mention the role of Frontex in this area, and also the obligation for member states to apply international law and the United Nations Convention for Refugees.
Next one, I think, David, please.
Geneva Convention on Refugees. Sorry.
Thank you, David Carretta, Radio Radicale, Italian Radio. Again on migration, if I may. I didn't understand your question. Is the Parliament in favor of financing walls or not? Because if I remember well, in the past there was a clear position, at least by the one of the committee, the Libe committee. And the second point is on the a proposal by Italy to have code of conduct or guidelines for NGOs, vessels, and search and rescue activities. The Libe committee has been quite critical on the decree of the Italian government. Is it also your view that this decree is a problem in terms of rule of law and European law? Thank you.
So I think on the first part it's asked and answered. The Civil Liberties Committee, which is a committee I worked almost 10 years in, has always discussed either in holistic reports, in other words, that went through every single part of what a migration policy for the EU should look like, or individually on legislative instruments, both in the last mandate and in this mandate. I think we can very much work with the legislative proposals that are on the table. And in those proposals, there are references to management of external borders, there are references to how you build trust within the Schengen area, there are references to what should be viewed as a country of origin, a country of transit, and secondary movements. These are the discussions that have taken place within the Civil Liberties Committee. Admittedly, in this mandate, because of the pandemic and the fact that we were focusing on the Recovery and Resilience Facility and the current energy crisis, inflation and the war, where I would have hoped for further advancement in the co-legislative procedure on the legislative instruments, that we actually signed a roadmap with the Council and in fact 5 presidencies that will lead us up to the June 2024 elections. I would like that process to be sped up, and all these issues that were blocked already last mandate have the potential to be unblocked and clarified and majorities found. Majorities are always difficult to find in the European Parliament, as I said earlier. However, I think in these legislative instruments, I think we can manage to create that policy that is safe, that has solidarity at its core, but that also looks at what is happening at the external borders and how those external borders can be managed. And this makes a difference, of course, with whether it is a maritime border, it is a land border, whether we are looking at what happened last year with hybrid threats through Belarus, with the Baltic states and Poland. I think we have learned a lot, and this is the approach we would take in return. On the code of conduct, I would say that there is a directive on the let's say adopted, which is called the Facilitation Directive, and it's one of those instruments that needs to be looked at in order to see that, for example, when we're talking about the high seas, when we're talking about asylum applications and where they are placed, that's where the obligations of search and rescue apply, depending on the location where the rescue takes place.
Thank you. Alice, FT, please.
Alice Hancock, FT. I wondered if you could talk a bit more about accession talks, how confident you feel about those starting this year, and is there a sense that Ukraine could be held up as an example of speedy accession to other applicants? And given your recent experiences, to what extent was there a discussion of the recent Ukrainian effort on corruption and how much further it will need to go on that? Thank you.
Thank you. So with regards to the second part of your question, we are hopeful that reforms need to continue, and in fact, President Zelensky referenced that in his speech to the plenary today. And at all points, wherever those reforms that are necessary to be made were mentioned, President Zelensky and his colleagues were very, very, actually, not only receptive, but active in saying, of course. So that also will determine the speed with which steps are taken. If we look at that speed, and I remember when I met President Zelensky on the 1st of April in Kiev, and the perspective then was, even before the announcement that Ukraine would become a candidate country of the European Union together with Moldova, was that the responses to even the initial phases and questions that would be put by the Commission would be answered much earlier than what one would say is a normal path to membership. And that has been the pace that has been kept up, really. If we see also the quality and the depth of negotiations that took place already last week when the College of Commissioners visited Kiev. So you could see one-on-one, minister by minister, with the equivalent commissioner, and the level of preparedness and readiness that there is, that I think should be matched by our political will to be also ready to take the next step. So we welcome the increase in resources. We welcome the fact that there is let's say, a very, very strong appetite for the fact that accession negotiations should open. Timeline, of course, differs. It depends on the language used. But for me, I look at a country that is fighting our war since the 24th of February 2022. And that country needs to be given a perspective that it was promised already by the European Parliament on the 1st of March and then in June by all the member states. That is what we will go with in 2023, and it's a very, very clear position of the Parliament, and also the agreement between the group leaders that took place yesterday in the Parliament.
And one last question. Alberto, you ask for the floor, please. This was the last.
Thank you. Good evening, President Metsola. You've been the only leader of the institutions that has expressed this morning, until so far, a concrete support for sending combat planes and large-range missiles to Ukraine. In your opinion, is there a lack of commitment from the leaders? Does the EU risk being late? President Zelensky said twice this day that he could not live from Brussels without a clear response. Do you think the EU has given him those clear answers?
What I said this morning was a reflection of what has been, for quite a while now, the position of the European Parliament as adopted in a resolution. And in fact, a group leader statement says that the delivery of weapons such as the ones you mentioned should be considered. And that was repeated by myself with the leaders this afternoon, both in the big meeting and then bilaterally. Why do I say this? Because President Zelensky was very clear, and he made the point that we are going to continue to fight for our common values and what we all need to defend together. And it is in that perspective that I would say some leaders reacted positively and said, look, we were slow to deliver earlier, would we be slow again? In this regard, I share that approach, and I think we should be willing to continue to listen and see what the Ukrainians need, whether it is financial, whether it is logistical, whether it is military or logistical support. We also have to be prepared for an escalation by Russia in the next few weeks. So this period is decisive, and we have to respond proportionately because the threat is existential, not only to Ukraine, but neighboring countries if Putin doesn't stop.